Ever wonder why 95% of leads do not convert? Why cold call rates are down and prospects don't open our emails? Why our responses of robocalls and implanting pixels to track user interaction, mostly without permission, is backfiring spectacularly? Well, that's what we intend to find out here in the Buyer Side Chat podcast. There are scores of podcasts about selling, but most miss the shift that has come upon the buying-selling process. The initiative has since moved from the supply to the demand side. The Buyer Side Chat, your podcast of record for B2B buying, talks to actual buyers, persons, not personas, in the quest to understand the real buyer's journey, their trials and tribulations, challenges and outcomes they're striving for. Welcome to the Buyer Side Chat. Thank you for your time and for joining us in this session. I have a favor to ask. While you continue to listen to the podcast, please leave a comment or rating at iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I personally look at each comment and will give you a shout out to each of you in our following episodes. It means a lot to hear from you. Just a quick intro to PitchLink. One of the biggest challenges companies face is the inability to standardize their message to the prospect across a sales team without losing its essence. What sales experts call standardization at the highest level. Basically cloning your best salesperson and her pitch across your entire team. Yet ensure it is personalized. Till PitchLink, it was a lot of work, if not impossible. With PitchLink, you can get your best salesperson to build the narrative and then allow your entire sales team to duplicate the pitch with one click and then personalize it using inbuilt video recording and teleprompter. Sales reps can also insert relevant links directly into the duplicated pitch flow to further personalize it for the new prospect. Want to know more? Sign up for a free one-on-one session. Now, on to our guest for today. Today we have with us Thomas Williams, founder and chairman of Strategic Dynamics and author of the books The Seller's Challenge, How Top Sellers Master 10 Deal-Killing Obstacles in B2B Sales, and Buyer-Centered Selling, How Modern Sellers Engage and Collaborate with Buyers.
As professional salespeople, we sell change, right? That's what we sell. And yet we're the worst ones to change. You know, we're creatures of habit. We don't want to change. And I think that's the problem, is that we've got this legacy approach to a methodology that we've used in the past that was successful in the past, but it's no longer working. And we don't want to change. We just physically, as individuals, resist that change. And yet we say to our customers, we want you to change. It's kind of a paradox, isn't it?
Tom is currently the founder and chairman of Strategic Dynamics. The firm helps organizations accelerate revenue generation by improving sales effectiveness. The firm offers new hire and behavioral style assessment tools that specialize in leadership, sales, management, conflict resolution, and communication. Buy-sell process mapping, development of sales playbooks, and buyer personas. And several programs based upon 2 books entitled The Seller's Challenge and Buyer-Centered Selling. Now, on to this exciting episode with Thomas Williams. Tom, welcome to the show. I am so happy that you are back, albeit in a different show with me. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be back with you today.
Tom, before we actually move in and start discussing how the buyer has changed over the last decade or so, or maybe 2 decades, tell us a bit about the work you are doing, the books you are writing, the ones you have written. Give us a sense of who you are.
Well, thank you. I think by way of introduction, I'm a lifelong learner. I've been a sales professional pretty much my entire career. I actually started in sales when I was about 7 years old with a cutting lawns and with a lemonade stand. So I go back quite a long way. The 2 books we've written are Buyer-Centered Selling, and the second one is The Seller's Challenge, and basically trying to help sellers sell in this tough new milieu and better understand the modern buyer. The work we're doing today is working with clients, and trying to help them understand how to help their sales forces understand how buyers buy in today's market.
That's great. So that sets up the talk for today. What has changed? The B2B buyer is not the same. The buyer has changed. What has changed?
Well, I think buyers today are more educated and more informed. They've researched informed opinions about your products or services before they've ever even reached out to you. Many of them have already developed a short list of providers, or at least vendors or suppliers that they want to have an initial conversation with. And most of have developed a set of questions to go along with that whole process. So sellers today have got to sell it differently. They've got to offer insight and perspective. They've got to collaborate with buyers. They've got to co-create solutions and be more what we call a concierge. That really helps them by building consensus while reducing the risk that is associated typically with a large complex purchase.
The problem that I see when I'm talking to salespersons is that although we sort of start acknowledging the fact that the buyer is more informed today, the buyer has more information at his disposal today, we continue to sell the same way. Why is that? I mean, there is enough literature, enough research available, yet there are literally millions of businesses still trying to sell the same way they used to 10, 20 years back.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've had this conversation with several of my colleagues. As professional salespeople, we sell change, right? That's what we sell. And yet we're the worst ones to change. We're creatures of habit. We don't want to change. And I think that's the problem is that we've got this legacy approach to a methodology that we've used in the past that was successful in the past, but it's no longer working. And we don't want to change. We just physically, as individuals, resist that change. And yet we say to our customers, we want you to change. It's kind of a paradox, isn't it?
And why is that? I mean, is it the failure of the sales leadership? I mean, I can understand down the line, people who are trying to make quota, they're trying to do anything. I mean, it's a very complex topic, Tom, as you know. I mean, we'll get into compensation management, we'll get into arbitrary quota setting, and I mean, let's not get there today. But all I'm saying is it not more of a leadership failure than actually the sales force failure?
You have to look at leadership and ask the question of, do you understand how buying has changed? And have you realigned your sales organization to that event? I guess I would say it's a sales leadership problem for sure. If the question is, most of these sales leadership are going and following the methodology that they have followed for years. It's one that they're comfortable with. It's one that they grew up with. It's one that they were successful with. And so there's a resistance for them to change because buyers have changed. And what's happening typically is where you see is the new startups, they're much more prone to trying something new. It's the older, larger and medium-sized organizations that resist the change and want to go back to legacy, sales methodology programs and things that work for years, but they're less effective today or ineffective today.
Right. What is fueling? I mean, everybody knows that internet has essentially disintermediated many businesses. One of the things it's disintermediated was information, which is what fueled the change in the buyer, right? The buyer was no longer dependent upon trade shows and meeting salespeople to gather his or her intelligence, right?
Sure.
So what else besides this is actually going on?
Well, I think there's a bunch of different things that are going on. One is, we talked a little bit earlier about increased buyer knowledge. There's also a greater number of buyers that are now involved. They're going through a much longer research stage to be sure that they're making the right and informed decision. I think another one is there definitely is a greater reliance on self-diagnosis. We see this much more at a senior level in our practice, where people, again, it goes back to what we used to do, what worked for us in the past when we were on the field or when we were a regional or a district manager, those types of things. There's also, I think, the formation of more buying committees today. In other words, there used to be fewer people that were involved. Now, let's mitigate the risk. Let's go and look at all the different people that are going to be, number of people and all the individuals that are going to be affected by the change that we're going to make. and let's make sure they're all involved. And so what that does is it increases, the length of our sales cycle. It gives it by an order of magnitude. We have more people with different perceptions of what they want on a personal level, and what needs they need at an organizational level to be met. It takes more time to go and build consensus with those people. I think the younger generation is looking at is becoming more and more prominent as B2B buyers. They're looking for trusted sources of information. So they're looking more for peer recommendations and testimonials from peers. And then I think the last thing we're seeing is a generational shift. The huge change in the number of B2B buyers that are much younger.
Right, absolutely. And this is in direct contrast. I mean, one side, because of the number of decision makers as a part of the buying committee increasing from the 2 or 3 to 5 or 6 or 7, 7.8 if you remember the one Gartner data somewhere, to today up to 20, obviously that's lengthening the decision making process. That's working in such contrast to the need for your quarterly quota.
That's right. Let me give you a couple of statistics that are kind of interesting. 42% are under the age of 40, and they all grew up with technology, right, as today's buyers. And so they're digital natives, and their phone is now an appendage, and it's a gateway of information. And so this means there's a huge generational shift that's occurring in B2B buying, and organizations and sellers have got to adapt. Another interesting fact is 74% did have more than half of their research online before making a purchase, offline. So there's a greater, dependency upon independent research and self-diagnosis. 65% of B2B buyers rely on peer information, recommendations, and independent review sites because they do trust those sources more than they trust a typical sales representative.
Right.
So, so these are really interesting data points that tell us as leaders, we've got to change. We've got to sell differently than we have in the past. And what's interesting is, as further proof, look at the percentage of win rates of forecasted deals. It hasn't gone more than about 48%, 48% in the last 15, 20 years, right? The number of reps that are making quota hasn't changed, in the last 15 to 20 years. So the traditional approaches that we're using in sales, whether it's methodologies, the way we're building skills, they're just not working. And so it's time to do something differently and sell in a different way.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many important points that the stats speak for themselves. Where do we start to make the change?
Well, I think there's several starting points. One is, we touched on it earlier. Sales leadership's got to change. Yeah. Sales leadership has really got to get to be more involved and more understanding of the modern buyer. Part of that, another aspect of it is we need to link sales and marketing together, in a symbiotic way. I think a third thing is we've got to look at, right now we're all siloed in different departments, sales, marketing, sometimes sales enablement. You can look at sales operations. There's different ways to structure them. But really what we're all talking about is, how do we get centered around revenue generation as a company? Yeah. Right. So how do we look at and really get everybody that's involved that potentially touches a customer? How do we get them involved and understand what the customer's needs are? So we're going toward more of an omni-channel, approach to contacting and understanding the buyer. Once we understand the buyer in our market, then we can make the internal changes, with the way in which we structure our sales force, with the compensation, with our hiring practices, our training, etc. But I think it starts with those three things.
How are the buyers from the different kind of companies you are working with, and also the research that you did for your book? How are the buyers reacting to this stubbornness to not change of the sales organizations?
Well, I think that the most typical way they're that they're changing is they're sending more RFPs, right? So they're trying to commoditize the solutions. They're doing self-diagnosis. When they do self-diagnosis, they say, we know what to buy, so we're going to just call vendors in late in our process and ask them to pitch product, or we're going to ask them to do respond to a competitive bid or reverse auction or an RFP, those types of things. I think that's one way that we're seeing people react. The smart seller, I think, gets in early and helps the buyer to understand the cost of an action. They show them, a difference between their current state and the future state, and show them what the cost of an action is if they don't make a change. And then they help them buy. And one of the ways, I think we may have touched on this in the past. One of the ways that we do that is with what we call an outcome enablement plan. And really, is all it is a living document that's created by the seller, with modification made by the buyer, to help them develop, what are the key steps and the milestones, key steps or milestones that they should go through in order to make an informed, intelligent decision. And then underneath that, you can determine who are the people within the organization that they're going to be affected by change, and what are the activities that you need to go through to make a change. We found that that's an enormously helpful document because if you think about when buyers make a change or are going to buy something, unless you're making a repeat purchase where you know exactly what you want, it's a difficult process to go through. It may be a process where you've never bought this product or service before in your history. You're a young individual, you've been promoted, you never had to buy this before. Could be that another aspect could be is you've bought this before, but it's been 7 to 10 years because that's the life of the product or service, and things have changed, and you don't know what you need to know in order to make an informed decision. You could have gone through a merger, an acquisition, a divestiture, and now there's different people involved. There's different process, and now you don't understand what's that process, right? You could have been newly promoted. I mean, I could go on and on with the different iterations of what could happen, but the bottom line is that if you, as a buyer-centered seller, if I said to you, if we've had an initial discussion and I really believe that I can help you, and there is a cost of an action there, I can then approach you and suggest that here's a document that would help you. And I would say to you something like, I've got a document that I can share with you that'll help you buy. We'll determine the key activities. We'll work through what those key activities are together, and you can share it with your organization. And it'll help you make an informed, intelligent decision. And irrespective of whether you buy from me or not, you're going to have this document available to you. I've never had anybody turn me down in the last 5 years. People love it. And it makes it easier for them to buy because it gives them a roadmap. It gives them a template. It gives them an approach of how to navigate all these waters.
True. In a scenario like this, if all the vendors are doing a similar kind of approach, how does that pan out? It's possible that when I offered this to my prospective customer, my competitor, who is also quoting the same customer at the same point of time, because all 4 or 5 of us have been brought in by the customer, they also take the same approach. How do you differentiate at that stage?
Well, that's interesting. First off, is there's very few people doing it. That's the first thing I would say to you, and it's probably more prevalent in the software as a service market than it is anywhere else. So most of the time, I don't come across that. Okay. But I would say to you, it's the same thing as if you're selling one sales methodology versus another. Right. If you were in the training business, you differentiate through execution. You differentiate you as a seller and how you interact with that customer. And do you have commission breadth, where all you want to do is get the order and sell to them, or do you really want to help the buyer, buy? And are you willing to walk away if your solution isn't the best one for them and learn to live to fight another day? That's the difference.
It's time for a short break. Stay with us. After the break,
I might gonna be employed with that organization 30 or 40 years. my integrity is I've got to build up with those customers. The customer base is maybe it's going to turn over a bit, so I want to treat them well. I think in that situation with that type of individual, building trust and credibility and being honest with their customers is imperative. Now, if I'm a different guy, I'm working the same city, same company, same product, but I sit there and I say to myself, all I want to do is earn commission, and in 2 years, I'm going to go work for another company. That's where it becomes more problematic.
You are listening to a Business Podcast Network original. Podcasting is the fastest growing content marketing opportunity, which is untapped. We can help you craft your audio strategy and help leverage the wide reach and easy streaming capability that the smartphone penetration provides. It is easy, it is powerful and personal. Talk to us to find out how podcasting can help you build your brand and reach out to your targets like never before. Write to us at bpn@bizcast.in. That is bpn@bizcast.in. Business Podcast Network. Podcasts end to end.
Welcome back. I'm Shubhanjan Sarkar, your host for the Buyer Side Chat and founder of Pitchling, the buyer-seller engagement platform. Let's dive right back into the episode with Tom Williams. The ability of a salesperson who is incentivized to sell and get a big chunk of his or her compensation as incentive, for that person to say, okay, I understand your requirement, and you know what, you're better off with my competitor X and not with me, because I don't think I will do full justice to your requirement. I will go 70% of the way, 80% of the way, but not 100% of the way. And I think it's not in your interest to invest and engage with me. I'm going to walk out, withdraw myself from the deal, but I'll be available to you for any inputs that you need, any clarifications that. How many companies actually tell this to their sales folks and actually reward such behavior?
I can't think of one.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure there's, and I'm sure there are some out there.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
I haven't come across them where there's a de facto strategy, or that is something that I've heard a VP of sales or a chief revenue officer tell their team. I think it's more up to the individual and their own personal integrity. The way I look at it, is let's say I'm not changing jobs, I'm going to stay. I'm a guy that's I live in a given city, wherever it is around the world. I've covered a territory. I'm working for a great company. I might gonna be employed with that organization 30 or 40 years. My integrity is I've got to build up with those customers. The customer base is maybe it's going to turn over a bit, so I want to treat them well. I think in that situation with that type of individual, building trust and credibility and being honest with their customers is imperative. Now, if I'm a different guy, I'm working the same city, same company, same product, but I sit there and I say to myself, all I want to do is earn commission, and in 2 years, I'm going to go work for another company. That's where it becomes more problematic. And it becomes more problematic, if a company doesn't have a customer success department. There's a difference between, I think, land and expand, sell the customer a product and expand then through cross-selling and own more market wallet share with that particular customer. Then the philosophy is all I got to do is sell to more customers. And if they don't get the results that they want, if I don't deliver the outcomes, no problem, because there's other customers for me to sell to. And unfortunately, that's the way our compensation system is set up in most companies. And so if you don't have an account management program set up, or a customer success program set up where someone else is touching that customer, you get extreme churn. And it's interesting. I did a podcast just a few weeks ago on win-back, and I explained a couple of situations where I went in and worked with a VP of sales, and they were being asked to grow at 25% a year, and he was losing 15% and 20% of his customer base. So his net was about 5% growth. How you do that? You can't sustain that. So it really does make a big difference in how you're structured and what behaviors do you want out of your sales organization. I think as we go on, there's becoming such a large discussion around compensation and how salespeople are compensated, we're going to see more and more companies go to a different process.
Yeah, and before I move on to the next question, I just want to mention that I was reading a report, and I think it is Richardson, where they said that the white space is in the ability to find more opportunities with the existing customers and not try and go find new customers. It's same land and expand, but for that you have to stick there and deliver on your previous promise, right?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting and pretty basic, right? If you don't provide value and the right and delivered outcome to the customer, they're certainly not going to recommend you to other peers or other business units within the organization. So that it goes to common sense at that point. The white space is a big deal. I think there's always different ways to grow your revenue stream. To me, number one is let's avoid churn. If I can avoid customer churn and have customers rebuying from me, that's the easiest way to build up some revenue. The second thing is you always have got to add new logos, right? If you don't add new logos, you're not growing, because at some point your cross-selling efforts, so even if you get all of it, at some point you're going to run out of revenue, right? So you've got to continue to prospect, get new customers. But you're right, the low-hanging fruit, and we wrote about this in one of the books, is the white space. It's really looking at what other additional opportunities are there within your customer base, because that's the easiest customer to sell to. They already know you, they know your company, they know your product. You're already on one of their approved vendors. You're in their accounting system. And so it's the easiest and best customer to go after and sell.
Absolutely. So the other point you mentioned a while back, and I was talking to the CIO of one of the largest companies in India a few episodes back, and he was actually talking about the same thing, that you have no idea how much influence peer groups have in the final decision. He says that he told me a story where a vendor went back home in the evening thinking he's getting the order tomorrow. That night, this CIO spoke to a colleague in another company saying, I'm finalizing with these guys. What do you think? And that guy said, hey, be very careful, because these guys will not deliver on ABCD, because I had similar experience with them. And overnight, the order, which was several $1 million, went to somebody else.
Right.
So how deep is this peer connection for buyers?
Well, I think there's a tremendous fear for buyers. I mean, we could do a whole different podcast on risk and risk aversion and risk mitigation. But yeah, I think there's a large number of issues that buyers have when it comes to risk. I think one of the most important ones is performance issues. Uncertainty. Will that vendor deliver? Right. There's performance issues. There's uncertainty. I think there's always inertia. That is always one of them. Excessive caution. Is this the right vendor? And we could go on and on with a number of different risks that they go through. And ironically, what's interesting is that when I coach salespeople and I ask them, what are the risks that the buyer perceives? I get a lot of blank stares, or I'll get one or two answers. And I'll say, how do you know if you ask the question of, how risky is this decision? Or what risk or concerns do you perceive on an individual level? I mean, what risk or concerns do you perceive on a collective level? And unless you identify those up front, you walk away like this individual. You think you're getting the order, and all of a sudden you get blindsided, and it was all there. We just didn't ask the right questions.
Right. So what are the major changes that you see coming in the buying process? What do you foresee?
Well, I think we're going to see buyers become much more cautious than what they already are. I think we're going to see um, much more reliance on independent third party um, data research, information. Uh, I think that's going to be one. I think a second one is we're going to see an increased reliance on buying committees or buying decision teams, and we're going to see more. We're seeing more and more people that are being involved in that decision, and we're going to have to, as sellers, figure out ways to build consensus to help them make an informed decision, because most of those groups, those committees, are dysfunctional just by nature. They all have disparate goals and objectives, and many of our buyers don't know how to bring those people together in a coalesced way in order to make an informed decision. And we know from the research that if we try to get it down to an individual level, we're going to fail. What we have to do is focus them on the organizational objective of what is that cost of an action and how does that react back to an organizational priority. And if we make them understand that, and we get people then to focus not on an individual level, but what's right and what's best for the organization, we're going to make better decisions. And so I think salespeople are going to have to learn how to build consensus, and do that. And I think the third thing is we're going to continue to see these investments are very risky. Take a look at what's happening today in the supply chain due to COVID. What we're finding is the over-reliance on one or two vendors or vendors that are in one or two countries. And, we never looked at, the understanding of what could happen if that supply chain got disrupted. So because of those changes, and, it's happening, and you're seeing in every industry that has a chip that's involved, because of that, what we're seeing is excessive caution and much more greater higher. We're seeing procurement become much more important in the overall function of an organization. It's going to be a different call point for a lot of salespeople, and some salespeople that sell into public procurement, they're there already. But if you're not in the public procurement side, most people, avoid procurement like the plague. And the only way they go there is if they're going to pick up a purchase order. Well, that process is changing.
Yeah, I think you have encapsulated the scenario very well, and I think people need to pay attention if they have to sustain. And I would really expect that the leadership which is there currently, and it's changing, of course. Millennials will be in position maybe over the next decade. You'll have more and more millennials taking over the purchase function, and things may change there. But till then, I think if we need to sustain a favorable relationship with our customers, I think there's a lot that you shared today and people can benefit from.
Yeah, if you look at how the buyers are changing, and it's generational. Older people like you and I have got to change our methods and our approaches. It's just because what we used to do, will work with maybe 50% of our market. And what about the other 50%? So we've got to change.
Absolutely.
The Buyer Site Chat is brought to you by PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. PitchLink enables high-quality interactions between buyers and sellers through presentation and discussion modules. Sellers create personalized sales presentations and reach out to prospects through a non-intrusive, buyer-qualified engagement. PitchLink requires no installation or download and holds the entire repository of sales collaterals and buyer-seller conversation. Talk to us to know more about how you can engage with customers without intrusion. Call us on 650-847-5884. That is 650-847-5884.
Tom, thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to our next session.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your program. Have a great day.
We have a fantastic lineup over the next couple of episodes featuring great conversations unraveling in depth how the real buyers buy. Stay tuned.
Thank you for being with us today on the Buyer Site Chat. This is the podcast of record for the buyer side journey. And those who know, that's the journey that matters. We hope this conversation helped you with insights that you can go and apply right now to your own value transaction process. See you in the next episode of the Buyer Side Chat.